Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfa. Let's talk about some wolves. On this episode of the podcast, I have back with me Renee Alfero, our behavior specialist. Hello, Renee.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Awesome to be back.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
A little cooler today. I like it. It's like we got like a fall day for some reason. We're back at 80 degrees instead of 105.
Amazing.
It does feel amazing. We've been talking for weeks now about we're going to be talking about wolf bonding and what that means, especially up here at Wolf Connection. I don't know why this came into my head a couple of times, but I'm realizing, again, I'm speaking for myself and probably most humans out there, but I just feel as though humans are clumsy because I notice sometimes when I walk through, and you can disagree with me, and granted, I'm not talking about the superior athlete or the Olympic athlete, but in relation to an animal or a wild animal in their habitat, when I'm walking through and I think I'm in my body, I'm doing great, and then I trip over some rock, and it's not even like a tiny one, it's a huge rock you can see. And to demonstrate how awesome these wolves are, I have a post on my Instagram from probably a few weeks ago with Ozma, where she's howling in her habitat, and then with little to no effort, she probably does at least a 4.5 foot leap onto the rock that's in the center of her habitat. And it's not as though it's a flat rock. She has to find her grip, but she already knows where it is. And it's just the easiest thing she's ever done. I don't know why that came to me. I wanted to say that before we started, just because I feel like that's such an awesome thing to realize, that how innate and how awesome these animals are, just generally.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally. And they're so incredibly in their bodies. I mean, to see her jump up there, it's like a levitation trick. You know, like you're watching a magic show happen. Because it's like 1 second she's on the ground and the next she's up on this rock and throwing her head back, howling with the pack. And your eyes just still can't compute how.
And it's just so natural. And she doesn't break stride. There's no breaking stride in her when she's howling. And then when she comes back around, and it's one swift motion. I'm just going to trot, and like you said, off a springboard or a trampoline.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
They don't have as much junk in their brains as we do, I guess.
They really
She doesn't
don't
question it, and she doesn't hesitate either.
No. And she's awesome. Man, she's grown already leaps and bounds since the last time you and I talked.
Oh my gosh. Amazing.
Man,
yeah.
She's awesome. Yeah. If you guys get a chance, check out my Instagram. I think it's, Kalfa Nation, and then just search Ozma, the hashtag Ozma Wolf Connection. She's pretty cool. So yeah, I wanted to, because you and I have been talking about this for weeks, about the bonding, and obviously with the things that have been happening here at Wolf Connection since COVID has come down. We've had another round of semi-lockdowns here in our area, and just really the progression of some of the staff and the volunteers, as well as the wolves and wolf dogs, and how those things are sort of interconnected and how they intertwine a little bit. So just to give people an idea, when we say we want you to go and bond with an animal, with whatever wolf or wolf dog it's here, what do you want that to mean to that individual?
For me, it's just simply, well, I guess saying simply isn't simple. It can be one of the most challenging things for someone to do with our pack. I guess really in general for anybody, truly, to actually bond with another being. And it just means by going down and being with the pack with no agenda, no expectation, I really want Leo to come up to me today, which is fine to have those aspirations, right? That thought of having a connection with a certain animal or one that you're drawn to, but you're not putting any kind of pressure on the animal to do that. It's having this respect of them and their own timing, and also respecting your own timing. Because a lot of the times, like sometimes we think we're at a certain level, or we have an awareness, or we can walk on our own 2 feet without tripping. And then before you know it, you're tripping over your own feet or your shoelace is untied.
Right.
And so it's really just allowing the space for whatever to happen. So it's about going and being and just sitting either in their habitat or just outside their habitat, in a relaxed, calm position that's comfortable for you. And that's important because then that way you're not fidgeting, you're not constantly shifting, you're able to kind of ground yourself into the earth and just be with them. Because a lot of times as humans, we're on 2 feet, not on 4 paws like they are. And typically we have socks and shoes on our feet that are really disconnecting us from the elements. And so by sitting on the ground, that helps us kind of get more to the wolves' level of what they're constantly feeling around them in their environment.
Yeah. I notice when we have any students or any guests that come here, that's the first thing we do is we try to really dig people's feet into the ground, even with their shoes on, and really try and have them feel into the earth as much as they can, because that bonding experience to get in the land initially will get you that much more connected. And it's not necessarily that you're going to have a certain bond. And I think that's what's unique about this situation is that we're not asking you or implying you're going to have, whether it be a physical experience, a lick, a kiss, things of that sort. And so there's multiple different ways that bonding can happen with these wolves, because not every wolf is able to come out and meet the public or can go out on leash. So I think it's important for people to understand that there are so many different ways to do this. And one that we were actually talking about this morning, Stephen and I'm flying solo, by the way. Stephen is not here. He's here with us. He's out and he's actually hiking some wolves. So with the feeding, so we here at Wolf Connection, we feed some animals fence fed, so hand fed through the fence. So when you're looking at certain animals and you say, this is growing a bond, and I'm sure people can understand the connection with food, connection with, if it's a dog, a cat, whatever sort of animal they may have at home, you have that connection because they know this is, my human, they're going to feed me, so I have that. It's somewhat the same there, but what's the deeper level that we get to with a hand feeding as opposed to opening a gate and putting the bowl down?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the hand feeding is a lot more intimate. Obviously there's a protection of the fence in between, and we're fitting the pieces of meat through the fence to the animal. And that usually comes when the animal gets to the point that they're comfortable enough to approach. And of course, for us, we're highly aware of our body language, since they're really great teachers of body language, even in the most subtle cues possible. So a lot of it entails of, kneeling down, coming to their level, giving them your shoulder so you're not frontal, so you're not in a confrontational type of stance. You're more just in an open stance with the food and bringing your hand gently to the fence. And in a way, it's like come bearing with gifts, right? So a lot of the times, like some of our animals will sit for food. Some of them will jump up on a house for food. A lot of people at their own homes with their own pets, they usually have to do something for their food. But in that moment of like fence feeding, it's all about the connection and just the giving and the receiving. And by doing that, the person is very openly not expecting anything from the animal and just giving them their food piece by piece by piece. And the wolves know that their food's going to be given to them. They have a history of knowing that we feed them every day and we give them their food. We're not like other wolves that are going to try to take it from them or anything. So there's that mutual respect there. And by giving it, it's just a moment together. It's as simple as if you were to think of a person, if I were to give you a gift, as I'm handing it over and your hands make contact with it, I'm making eye contact with you. And so there's this connection and this unspoken acknowledgement of me giving you something, and then having that reception of you essentially saying thank you. And with the wolves, it's in its own version of that, but it's getting them more comfortable with people. It's trusting us to give them their food. And what's incredible is that you would think that they're so ravenous and they want their food and we're touching their food and they're becoming possessive. And what's incredible is that they're actually really patient because they know it's coming. Because everything in our body is saying, I'm giving you your food. Yeah. And they'll just stand there and they'll wait and they'll take piece by piece by piece. And just you have this moment, however long it takes you to feed them.
Have you noticed too, because I've seen this too, where when we feed, Theo and Buddy and Mia and certain ones that have come here a little bit more anxious, what I've noticed too is even when there's a lot going on, if we center ourselves and like you said, you drop down to that level, how amazing that recognition is, where they'll almost slow down. It's really, and like you said, it's that bond of giving something to them and understanding that if I bring myself down to their level, I bring my heart rate down a little bit, it's going to make that interaction and that transaction all that much smoother.
Absolutely. And then in those moments, like with those more sensitive animals, like to think of like Mia, especially, other people are feeding other wolves within the same vicinity, within the same area. So there's a lot of noise, the golf cart's moving around, bulls are moving around, animals are still pacing in other areas. But when it's like you hit that point of being present with Mia and she recognizes it, it's almost like this veil of a bubble that falls over you and like time stops. And what I've witnessed like with Mia is she went from being tentative and uncertain, and she might stay away like a few feet and then come in for another bite and then back off again and come back and maybe walk around, is she's now more consistently coming up to the fence and staying there and wagging her tail every time you give her a piece. And when she's waiting, she's not pawing at the fence, she's not biting at the fence, she's simply just looking at you and looking at the food and waiting for it in a seemingly happy, excited way.
Right.
So to see an animal go from being shut down and fearful and hiding to expressing herself just through that one action that we consistently do with her is amazing.
Yeah, and that's the work that we try to do. And it's funny because you see a wolf like Mia interact that way, and then you see the difference with, let's say, Coda, who he seems as though he's younger in the way that he acts. He's very excited, and it's very interesting to see that dynamic of how different each animal can be. But and that's really what we look at, right? When we drop down, and I love what you said about the bubble, really, because it feels that way sometimes with certain wolves when you're in that moment and you go, if for nothing else at this point in time, I'm going to take the time. It may just be that one. It could be Gemma Hovind. It could be whoever it is, and say, I might not have fed perfectly for everybody else, but in this second, I'm going to feed these guys. I'm going to try something and it'll work out beautifully. It's weird how that works out with all these different personalities, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, you mentioned Coda, and Coda, when he first came and we were attempting to do fence feeding with him to build that relationship, he was just like Mia.
Yeah.
He was shy. He was skittish. He didn't know how to come up to the fence. He didn't understand how to take it from your hand through the fence, and he'd run away. He'd like jump in and take a bite and run away. And now he's one of the first ones to like sit at the fence and wait, and his butt wiggles in many different directions. Very excited. Even though he's now 10 years old, but he still exudes that kind of puppy-esque energy of excitement.
Yeah. And it's funny because you look at Daisy, and Daisy will sit for every piece, and she's gentle as can be. So it's really amazing that age doesn't matter, content doesn't matter. It's just amazing how you have to, when you're building the feeding bond, how you have to really check your energy each and every time, each and every enclosure, each and every animal, which one you have to be grounded for.
Right.
Or you have to be grounded for all of them. But the difference you have to do, the dance you have to do really to get those relationships right.
Right. And then it's a huge reflection too in those moments. Like then it's like, because in reality, like feeding like that, it's an intimate moment. It's a moment where it's just you one-on-one with this other creature and having this exchange. You can't hide behind anything, even though there's a fence. Like
I know,
your relationship with that animal is shown, and their relationship with you is also shown. With some people, Mia might still be skittish and stay a foot away and just kind of gently come in and gently back out. And then others, she's like staring at you and wagging her tail,
Right.
Or Daisy, or, like any of them, like you can see such a difference in their behavior, but it's amazing to watch as weeks pass how that animal and person, they get in the same wavelength,
Right.
They get in sync with each other. So you see it's kind of messy, like the person who's hand feeding, maybe they're nervous, they're very aware of the animal's energy and what their energy is doing and how it's affecting them. They might drop a piece might fling back out because the animal,
right.
Which is a fascinating experience to feed them a piece, and they're so excited to eat the piece that they fling it back through the fence.
That's right.
At
Yeah,
you.
it catapults back out.
It can be quite messy. But with that, though, is you're both learning. You're both learning your style. I mean, just like when you feed Coda versus Daisy, it's very different. There's more excitement with Coda. Daisy's much more respectful. With Mia, you have to be quieter. Like different things that you find that are specific to their personalities. And to just see that blend with the handler and the animal is really, really magical, just because you can just see that they connect on that level.
And those are the things that very few get to see those moments. And I think that's one of those things where when we talk about the bond and building the bond with these wolves, is that's probably the one point where a lot of people can't see that firsthand. Typically don't get to see us feed and understand that is really the beginning step, because it's really the first or second thing that you do as a volunteer. You do go in, and we'll get to when you're sitting in an enclosure and things and what that bond is like. So usually after that, when we do feeding, the next step typically, we're talking about is hiking. And that's what a lot of the guests, a lot of the kids see, because we bring the wolves out on leash. They're able to interact with them. So I know there are people, I've had dogs my entire life. I know you've had animals, you've had horses. And when you're out with your pet, that's another way. Instinctually, I always say we're going on an adventure. I mean, there's always, no matter what it is, especially up here, we could be down the same trail 1,000 times, and every walk is different. And I notice with Shade recently, I don't know why, he's been in my brain a lot. And he just really takes the time now to just sniff everything and look at everything. And it's always this sense of wonderment. So when we tell everybody that, and wolves have bonded through migration, they've bonded with us through hunting in that way for tens of thousands of years. So how is it possible that we get these short interactions? Individuals come here for a visit and they're already bonding. If we walk, let's say, a quarter of a mile, how is the energy level different as we walk? Because how does that shift?
Well, there's such a big difference. I mean, if you think of yourself going for a walk with somebody, you're moving in the same direction. You're either side by side or you're following behind, one's leading, one's following, versus obviously you and I get along really well. So we're facing each other right now in this room. But if you're just meeting somebody for the first time, that could be very intimidating. You don't know the person, they don't know you, or like the animal or things like that. It could be a bit stagnant. There's not emotion and a flow to what you're feeling. And you could clench up, you could bottle up.
There's that. What is it? It's freeze and...
the fight or flight.
Fight or flight, yeah. So there's that fight or flight moment that happens. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so what you see with the hiking is obviously... That's another huge bonding moment too, is the actual leashing process, which a lot of people don't see unless you work behind the scenes. And that's a reflection also too, where you're at with that animal is when you have to go leash them. Either they come straight to you, they go around you, they have their own little ritual that they like to be leashed by this one spot next to the double gate, and they sit at this angle. They all have their own ritual that you find the flow to be in with them. And that's part of the relationship. But then when we go hiking, they're coming into this group of people that the majority of the time they've never met. If it is like a one-time visit, they do meet the kids multiple times when it's the multi-week visits and programs. But by hiking and traversing terrain together, it takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
By just standing or sitting and staring at each other.
Right.
Hoping something cool is going to happen. I mean, we all wish like cool things like that, epic stuff would happen.
Yeah.
But I don't think the most craziest, awesome adventures ever happened by someone sitting on their butt waiting for something to happen.
I don't want when I'm hiking, I particularly don't want to encounter any sort of snake or things like that as on my adventure. Right? Other people can say differently, but yeah, I get what you're saying. But yeah, I feel that way too, is where, and I'll let you continue. But yeah, I feel like there's, like you said, it's that stagnation. And that happens, like you said, that bond just sort of grows and intertwines even more as we get out and going through terrain. Yeah.
Right, because like in motion, I mean, how many different research studies are out there that say when you're upset, you're angry or whatever, go for a walk, go for a run, get fresh air, get movement, get the juices in your body flowing so you're not getting that stagnant feeling inside your own body, and your own emotions and your own hormones. And so essentially, like with the wolves, they're excited, they're nervous. The people are super excited because they're in awe. They've never seen a wolf before sometimes, and they just want to go straight to the wolf. But of course, we give them the guidelines. Let's walk. Let's all kind of move out and kind of get into the flow together. And you see the people go from chattering a lot to getting quieter and quieter and quieter to then, in a way, what we call hiking like wolves, that all you hear is everyone's footsteps. Nobody's talking. Nobody's having conversation about what movie they saw last week, or what they're going to have for dinner tonight. They're simply just actually being aware of their surroundings. So the same thing like you mentioned about Shade, like hiking with him and how he's sniffing things, he's taking things in, he's having this like rediscovery of things around him. When if you were to look at it at a superficial level, you'd just be thinking, oh my God, he's like sniffing every little thing. We can't move on this hike. Like, oh my gosh, this is going to take forever. But in reality, it's then to reframe it and look at what's truly happening is he's getting to enjoy whatever smells are there, whatever creatures have gone through there since the night, or what other animals we hiked, the wolves that we've hiked through there in the morning, or even the people. Like, that's the other thing. We all hike these trails, and even though we don't necessarily hike with the same animals all the time, they're equally smelling our own scent. Yeah. So our smell is also their smell, in their habitats and on the trails. And it's just, that's how they find each other and recognize each other and come back to each other when they separate in packs out in the wild. All of it comes back to the bond.
Yeah. And I find that to be very... what you said before, when we sort of slow down, and I find myself doing that sometimes, where sometimes the goal is I want to get certain wolves out, I want to hike, and you're right. There is pressure, not pressure in the way that you would think, but there's only so much time in the day, and you want to make sure that they get the enrichment they get. And sometimes it's that reset that happens when they almost transfer. We always say that as long as you're grounded and you're calm, that the energy will transfer through the leash to the animal, and so they'll understand. I think it's anyway with your dog. If you're out with your dog and you're excited and happy, they're going to be excited and happy. It's the same thing with them, where it transfers back this way. And certain ones, Willow's very good at communicating that. Shade, I think, even in a way too, because he'll sort of stop. And I find it more often now where I go, all right, we're just going to go on a nice walk, and we're just going to see where it goes, if he wants to head back. And I think that's really, it's such a deeper level of connection to understand what this hike is actually about. And it's not just about getting them out to get exercise, quote unquote, but I think it's also, like you said, it's that enrichment angle. And to have that mutual agreement once out that, man, this can be a really interesting adventure as opposed to just having a walk.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And then, you add different levels of that based on the people that you bring in, other animals that they hike together. It's always something new for them.
Yeah. It's weird because you wouldn't think that. And it's because when we take guests, when we have larger groups of people and we go through the same trail and they go, wow, do they get bored? And I think it's almost like you have to drop into a way that no, this is going to be different every single time. Because as you said, you could run into an animal that's on the trail that wasn't there before. There could be a smell on there that wasn't there before. Things could be moved out of place a little bit if there was some crazy weather. So it's always good, I think, to go into it with sort of eyes wide open and just let all your senses sort of happen.
Yeah.
And like you said, I mean, you hike like a wolf, and then it's interesting when you see individuals or people really get it. And they're like, wow, I really have this connection or this bond, even in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we go from hiking, and then now we're talking about when we go into their enclosures, because there are some animals. Actually, let me refrain. I'll go back, because there are some that individuals can't meet outside. They can't hike. Shade. I keep going back to him. He's just in my brain a lot. But he's a wolf that doesn't typically come out with the public. He doesn't come out with kids. And when we say there's a bond that you can have energetically through the fence, let's say, a little bit more distance than feeding, probably 4 or 5 feet. In Shade's case, we're talking 10 or 15 from their enclosure. So how do we get that bond when we can't, because we always think of bonding as touching.
Right.
There's some sort of touch that has to be involved. And boy, I think if anything, what the shutdown is really showing is that we can have bond via, FaceTime and Zoom, and we can see each other. So there's that visual bond, and there can still be that energy bond. So how do we know that there's a bond that's happening if we can't touch? So if I'm sitting outside of Ozma, let's say, and then you just see her coming up, like, how does that work? And it's the same comfort level? That's sort of like the feeding, right?
Yeah. I mean, for me, the biggest thing working with everybody and the animals and seeing the connection between the two is the intention or the purpose of why are you going and being with that animal? Why are you sitting outside with them? Why are you going and hiking them? Because a lot of the times, and we'll do this as part of different programs and events of guiding this kind of activity for people that, it's their one time coming and, sitting outside a habitat of an animal that calls to them most. And they might not really know that animal's story yet, but there's something that called them there. And so respecting what your body's telling you, not letting your head think, oh, well, I liked that one's story or I liked that one's name or whatever. It's more about that energy feeling, just the seeing the animal and feeling into them like you would a person. Yeah. I mean, it's like if you're at a party or you're at a friend's house or even you're out in public and you can just go and order coffee and just that person is a connected, looking you in the eye, asking genuinely how you're doing.
Yeah.
It's going to make you feel good and you want to connect more with that person versus someone who's just staring at the register and not really connecting and scribbling down your coffee order. It comes back to the purpose and the intention. So if I were to go and sit outside a habitat and I was like, oh my God, in my brain, the chatter, right? The constant chatter that especially as humans are really good at, and constantly putting, a scoring system or a judgment on the outcome of things and saying, oh, I just really want Nolly to come up to the fence or I want Nolly to howl or I want her to be close and see her. And the funniest thing is whenever I see people have that kind of want that serves them only,
right?
Usually animals hide. You don't even see the animals. It's like that first opening scene into Jurassic Park, nothing is there. It's just landscaping and nothing exists. Right. But then you see people that just go to sit.
Right.
Just go to allow whatever is going to happen is going to happen, and they're okay with that. Whether they see an animal or they don't see an animal, whether they see the animal far away or the animal comes up close. And when you see people that are open to the experience, that's when those magical moments happen. That's when you see Ozma effortlessly fly up to this 4.5 foot tall boulder and know where her paws go and throw her head back and howl with the pack, or Nolly comes down and squeaks and has a stick in her mouth and essentially brings it to the front of her habitat like a gift to whoever's there, just by witnessing. And isn't that what us people want? Like if I'm sharing something that is about myself or like with what I'm friends, there's such power in people listening and witnessing each other.
Yeah.
You know, not like me to share what I'm saying and you to be like, oh yeah, well I had that too when I was a kid, or, you know, like not trying to like be the same or compare, just simply be like, yeah, like I see that.
Well,
you know, I hear it.
It's just to be. And you've posted a couple great things too with Leo, with Kenai. And I find that too where those sitting moments are sometimes the best. Sometimes I've seen individuals, myself included, where we just go up and the goal of my sit with Theo or Mozzie or something is if they are able to lay down or they're able to stop and they're just able to sort of breathe slower, to me that I've accomplished enough in that moment, in that bond, as I build those bonds with those wolves, is to make them, you know, I'm not here wanting anything. And it's such a contrast from a lot of everyday life about wants and needs. And it's really finding that back and forth, that give and take, like you were saying earlier, about trying to figure out. And it's it is sort of a puzzle because you're trying to figure out all these different personalities. I mean, think about it, 30 plus personalities, trying to figure out who needs what, who wants it.
Right.
You know, and I feel that it's such a growth edge to figure those things out. And it really just makes the bond that much deeper. It's
and a bond looks different for everybody, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, you can compare it to how some people really like hugs.
Yeah.
Other people like a fist bump or a high five, you know, or just like a hey, you know, like that's how they like to connect. But it doesn't mean one's lesser than the other.
Correct.
And then having that bond, like it's in every action you take around. Which of course, don't get me wrong, none of us are perfect. Like days we're distracted, days we're busy doing tasks or whatever.
Absolutely.
But like just this week, you know, some people have gone on vacation. It's summer. You know, people are taking breaks. It's hot, whatever. So we've been breaking up the teams a little smaller throughout the day, but by intentionally going in and being present with Theo when I'm going to go scrub his water buckets and give him fresh water, is each time he's like so playful. He's coming and his legs are flying all over the place. And if you all can go on Instagram or our website and you could take a look at Theo, I think there's some videos out there. He's got incredibly long legs that go every direction and huge paws. And so you can just imagine him play pouncing, you know, like your dog would at home. But he's massive, you know, and his legs go everywhere and he's running around his habitat and he's wagging and he's got like his ears back and tongue hanging out the side of his mouth. Like you could just feel the pure joy in him. And it's just because whoever was going in with him was just happy to be with him, right? Was just, I'm going in to do his water. I'm caring for him and I'm just going to be with him, you know, not the expectation of I'm going to go in and play with him. Like that wasn't at all what happened. It was just simply, I'm going to go in and care for him. And then that's what he gave back in return.
It's incredible. And I know there's one volunteer here that she has such a connection with Neo. And I know when she started and she came on a hike, and Neo is a wolf that sometimes you can't, maybe he'll come up and sniff if you're lucky, depending upon how he felt. But just hearing his story, connecting with the story, and then visually witnessing, like you said, and just the bond happened then. And I find that to be so powerful, is that there's bonding in stories and just, like you said, witnessing, doing work for someone else or another being. And just that, it's so amazing how that gets reciprocated the other way.
Absolutely.
Even if it's just like you said, if it's a look, sometimes I'll go in with Kenai and Bella and they'll be resting over the two of them by the water bucket by their house. And I go, I don't want you guys to get up, but I'm going to try and finagle my way around. And even if they're comfortable enough to where I can dump the water in and they don't move as much, or they'll get up and then they'll sit right back down. So it's just incredible how it's really a long game process. I mean, there have been some quick bonds with people here in this organization and volunteers, and it is so beautiful to see. But it's almost when you take these long game situations, it's almost that much more empowering to know that you can have these bonds in different ways, right?
And it's a process that goes on forever. I mean, and they can look in such different ways. Like I could talk about Max, for example. Max came to us at a year old by a well-meaning young man who, just didn't have the right lifestyle or living condition for him. And Max didn't get his needs met as a wolf dog. And so when he came here, Max was very defensive. He didn't want to be touched. Like he couldn't be leashed. Like, he was very like bark at you, nip at you, like do all these things, like all of these like defensive protection modes, which again, who of us has not been in a position that we've been a little nippy and barky at other people?
Right. Or defensive.
To be defensive. Yeah. And a lot of the times with my position here in the organization is, it's all relationship. Everything's relationship based, and every action you take builds up a relationship bank account. So when stuff gets crazy or an emergency happens or someone has to go to a vet or something, it's a lot of skill and knowledge that's involved. And whatever you have reserved in your relationship bank account can get you so much further. Right? And so like Max, always my bond with him was being the bridge for him to other people, like to help people understand who he was and how to bond with him. And he was comfortable for me to essentially leash him and pass him over and then support that process, and he would have more affectionate from the outside looking, petting, kissing people in the face, different things with other people that he wasn't doing with me. But I didn't judge it. I just knew whatever it was, that's what would happen. And he has had to be to the vet a handful of times because he could be a bit of a knucklehead sometimes and get himself in trouble. But what's interesting is maybe I'm not his favorite person to give him the best butt scratches or the ear scratches, but there's a different level of our relationship that he knows when I arrive and I have a crate, he needs to get in the crate. And I'm the one who takes him to the vet with help from other people, and he doesn't balk at it. He doesn't get defensive. He doesn't get reactive as much. Like there's this mutual understanding that my bond and relationship with you is to serve what you need right now. Yeah. And what's amazing is he's now, he's like 10, almost 11 now. So he's been here for almost a decade. He has grown exponentially, just like any animal or human who's ever been here in this organization. And we had to do some habitat switches recently. Some little shuffling game of some animals and enrichment involved and things. And I had to get Max and move him out of the way so other switches can happen to get him to where he needed to be. And it was the first time that even in the excitement and the unknown of everybody's moving around and he's going to get a new space, is he came and he just sat next to me and I was able to just give him a full stroke from his head to his back and do that a few times. And he was so receptive to it, which is not something that I've never imposed on him because he's never really shown he wanted physical contact. It was more about just like being together. And then he was really like kept doing the whole butt, he sit down and then he kind of scoot his butt, a half inch closer and closer and closer until he's like leaning on my leg. And the invitation was there and it was clear. And that was really based off of probably 10 years of giving him the space and giving him the respect and me never expecting him to do something out of his comfort that he wasn't ready for. Yeah. Because 5 years ago, he was not ready to be pet. Absolutely, he wasn't trusting of it. And now he is.
And I think it's interesting you said something just now with like the transfer of the bond from human to human in that way, because that also is another thing there was one that I was forgetting, is that when we're teaching other volunteers or handing or passing off the leash to someone with any of these wolves, any of them, it's such a trust. It's like an exchange, and you're exchanging like you said, that bank account, but you're also the trust exchange from, if it was myself handing off to a volunteer who it's their first time walking, whoever it may be. It could be Ranger, it could be JC, it could be Ayashi even at that point. And some of these wolves are more forgiving than others in terms of their skittishness or a little bit of uncertainty with an individual they haven't had. As you say, the decade or even the 2 or 3 or 4 years, the longer the bond builds, the stronger it is.
Right.
And I think that's another angle of the bond and relationship, is being able to transfer that from human to human and being able to have that trust, right, and say, hey, you're gonna do this, and have that full faith and capability that you're gonna go and feed them, you're gonna go and hike or do whatever it is, and it's gonna happen, and it will happen over time. Yeah,
it's that shared experience,
right?
So it's no different that, all of our animals come from different backgrounds, different breeding, different mix, different lineages. Like, they're not a natural pack. They're not a family that has been born together and raised together.
Yeah.
But we do our best to add that level of enrichment that we like to mix them, whoever's willing, to have a habitat mate and have different friends in the pack that they can live with. And a lot of the times, especially for a more skittish animal or a sensitive animal or one who's been abused or neglected or has a negative feeling towards people because of their past, is we'll put them with a more social animal.
Right.
So essentially they'll bond with that more social animal, and then that social animal is bonded to us, and that relationship starts building. That trust starts building from animal to human. And so that happens with us as well. If I have a relationship with an animal and they trust me and I trust them, then essentially, not to get too heady about it, but they can trust that I'm not going to put them in a bad situation.
Right. In a situation that's going to harm them, yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And it might be uncomfortable, and like the newer handler might be clumsy with the leash and trip on a rock, or, whatever, like, things happen when we're doing something new, or
I still trip on rocks.
Yeah.
all the time.
We're all doing it.
Oh my God. Go ahead.
But even the most skilled handler, like, you fumble with the leash sometimes, or you fumble with the gate latch or whatever,
right.
It happens all the time. And that's the amazing thing, is that there's that understanding and that respect and that trust built up, that it's nothing intentional against one or the other, that you're just moving through life together. You're always going to get hiccups. And, just like with people, like, imagine you going on an adventure and you break down or you get a flat tire with a friend or whatever, and then going through that process of you having to get through those challenges together.
Right.
You learn a lot about each other, and you see how you spoke to each other and how you support each other and helped each other get tools or whatever, and you got to the other end. It's the same thing with the animals. You go through experiences that might be uncomfortable or challenging or whatever, and you come through it at the other end, and you come through it knowing each other more and more deeply. And then there's that relationship that just builds and builds and builds.
Yeah. I just felt like this was something that I've been itching to talk about, and just really just get, because I think we explain it in such a finite amount of time when we see any guest up here or anybody who hasn't been here for a while. But I think really just to delve into it and understand that there are so many different ways, and it's not always the physical, and it's really the energetic. And I just really believe that it's so amazing when you can just sit outside and really let it happen, and you say, like, even the transference of the bond or the trust is powerful too, in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
And it can happen anyway.
And that's the thing too, is like the support of our team to each other. Yeah. Because of course, like, you can get very analytical about something and try to break it down in our brain of like, what's the wolf doing? Do they like me? Do they not? Do they whatever? And then that ends up getting away of what's actually happening. And so how we coach each other and help each other just sit with it and be quiet and just allow it happen. And then I always see it's that circling back when you'll ask a volunteer, what did you feel? Where in your body did you feel it? And they're starting to identify in their own body where they were feeling certain emotions that to them made sense.
Right.
Like if someone said, oh, like I felt this like warmth, in my throat, or, whatever they might explain. But by getting them back into their body, wolves are essentially parallel to the ground. Their head to their shoulders, to their back, to their rump, to their tail. They're even
across the board,
across the ground.
Mm-hmm.
They're horizontal in that sense. So, if you want to get into it, their brain, their heart, their digestive, like everything is even, right? And with us humans, our head is placed all the way up on the top. And sometimes things float around up there that don't necessarily serve us. And so like by bringing it back down into our bodies and feeling it, that's where the connection comes from too.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a good way to close it up. I love it. Any of the wolves that Renee and I have talked about, please go on our website if you want to learn more about them. You want to donate and sponsor, wolfconnection.org. Obviously, check out our Instagram, Wolf Connection. Renee, your handle is again, I can't remember, Renee Alfero.
Renee Alfero 22.
Mine is Calfination. So if you want to, any of the wolves that we spoke about, check them out. Definitely email us or go visit the website. So thank you for coming back on and talking about this. I love this stuff.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This is awesome. And, we need to do more.
Oh yeah. We'll do more. When we're on the cart one day, we'll figure out some other topics to talk about. Thank you guys for joining us. Howls to all of you out there. And we will talk to you again soon.
Bye.